Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. Even the greatest of nations and empires of the past have all collapsed. Why is that? Is every civilization destined to decline and fall? Or is there a definite cause that brings down great nations? Historians often identify many causes for national weakness and decline, but fundamentally, it is universal sin or failed morals that causes universal destruction. On today's program, we'll look at the new 21st century morality sweeping across the United States and Britain today. Where is it leading?
The Trumpet Daily.
According to historian Edward Gibbon, the root cause of the collapse of the Roman Empire was their loss of civic virtue and individual morality. Gibbon believed the laws of morality were as constant as the laws of physics. Now, was he right? Or is it somehow different today? A lot of people believe our modern societies are just too sophisticated, too enlightened to ever collapse under the weight of gross immorality and sin as the Bible defines it. But what do the lessons of the Bible teach us? And what about the lessons of history? Edward Gibbon was right. I want to start today by just looking at a snapshot of where we are today, morally speaking. And it's quite different than the way it was in Britain just a generation ago, or America a generation or 2 or 3 generations ago. Look at premarital sex. The Bible calls it fornication. Today it's widely accepted. In many cases it's seen as morally acceptable. The same with divorce. The same with so many things that used to be considered sin. I guess the latest of the day, transgender rights or same-sex marriage, again, very different from the way that it was just a few years ago. We had an article at thetrumpet.com, our website. This is the Trumpet magazine. You can subscribe to this and get this in your mailbox every month for free, no cost, no obligation. But we had an article just a few weeks ago. This was by Joel Hilliker. And notice what he said. He's talking about the new American morality and pointing out the inconsistencies and also just how unforgiving it is. He says here, the new American morality says that all men are rapists and potential rapists and should be feared and contained. At the same time, it says that if one of these men believes he is a woman, that is truth. We all need to play along. It is now moral to allow children to choose their gender from their earliest years. It is immoral to encourage them to conform to gender stereotypes, such as instilling in boys a duty to protect girls. I mean, that used to just be common sense. Teaching boys to be strong, masculine men, to protect girls, to protect women. But now, I mean, you can't push them into that kind of a gender stereotype. Let's turn over to Isaiah chapter 5. I mean, this seems it's very much upside down, isn't it? If you understand anything about the Bible, you know that it is. Just one more quote here from that same article. Fornication and out-of-wedlock birth, moral. And woe to anyone who would try to stop it. Pornography, so ubiquitous that it is regularly viewed, even by children, moral. He says same-sex marriage, moral. Heterosexual marriage might be okay as long as the man isn't the head of his family, which is a form of oppression and therefore immoral. These are the new rules of the new morality, or the new morality, you might call it. He called it the new American morality. And look at what it says in Isaiah 5 in verse 20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. See, woe unto them that take something that's evil, that's plainly described as evil by God himself, and call it good. And that's what we see happening. I mean, human nature wants to be considered good. And yet human nature is also, as Jeremiah 17 says, and Romans 8 and other passages, human nature is also hostile to God and his law of love. Human nature is dangerously sick, it says in the prophet Jeremiah's book. And so human nature wants to partake of evil, but then be considered good. And so we take evil things, evil behavior, and we put a good label on it and then feel good about ourselves. Notice what it says in verse 21. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. See, woe unto them who look to themselves for the standards of the day. Woe unto them who just follow after human reasoning and who don't come together with God, who don't reason together with God. Here again, look at the moral snapshot of our society today. There was a piece in the New York Times just a few weeks ago. This woman writing about pornography, again, just like Joel Hilliker said in that article I quoted from, and just how ubiquitous it is. I mean, it's so ubiquitous that they're now, in some schools in the Northeast of the United States, they're now starting classes using pornography to teach young people, to teach teenagers. There's one class in Massachusetts where 24 young people are getting together 2 hours a week over the course of a 5-week period. The class, this is according to the New York Times, aims to make them savvier, more critical consumers of porn by examining how gender, sexuality, aggression, consent, race, queer sex, relationship, and body images are portrayed in porn. It's to make them more savvy with respect to porn. That's what we're teaching, quote unquote, our teenagers, our children. This was in a lengthy piece right at the New York Times, the newspaper of record in the United States. The newspaper that many news organizations take as their script for the evening news. That's the New York Times. This class, as it's discussed in the article, is grounded in the reality that most adolescents do see porn. That's what the author says. The class takes the approach that teaching them to analyze its messages is far more effective than simply wishing our children could live in a porn-free world. Forget about abstinence only. I mean, it's the same exact thing when a couple of decades ago they were talking about abstinence-only classes in high schools and such, but then educators, the parents, they come to decide that, well, everyone's doing it, so let's just do away with the abstinence-only program and show them how to have safe sex. It's the same thing here. Everyone's going along, and so all the educators and leaders of society just have to go along with it. Think of it. Think of it. What would your grandparents think of teaching, quote unquote, teaching young people, teenagers, using this kind of filth? It's just a complete and total surrender to the forces of evil. It's just giving in to the ways of sin. It's just going right along with society. My father has a great section in No Freedom Without Law. That's one of our booklets. We're going to be offering some other booklets here today in just a moment. But in No Freedom Without Law, he talks about how pornography really is the engine of the internet. I mean, this was in the New York Times piece as well, the most popular pornographic website. It brings in almost 80 million visitors per day. And that's far more than some of the most popular websites in the world. As I say, it's like the engine. And this New York Times piece points out just how these sites are making it so easy for people to consume this filth, including teenagers. They don't ask for age. They don't ask for, any credit card information. You can just come right in and start viewing these kinds of explicit scenes, sex scenes. So if we can't stop our children from viewing it, then, as the New York Times brings out, we might as well join them and help them to do it in supposedly a safe kind of way. Some sex educators are even creating a porn education website for parents. One of these educators is quoted in that New York Times piece as saying, "I would recommend good sites to my daughters at age 15. Well, she's quite proud of this. 15 years old. I'd recommend it to them. She says, when I think they're mature enough, we're so curious to find out about sex. People have doubts and insecurities about themselves sexually. Is it okay that I like that or this? I think porn can be a good thing to have as an outlet. I'm not scared by explicit sex per se. I'm afraid of bad values. She's not afraid of pornographic images coming across the screen right in front of her teenage daughters. What she is afraid of is bad values. And who decides? Who decides what are good or bad values? She decides, or society decides. That's the way it is with human reasoning. And haven't you noticed that the standard just keeps going lower and lower? Using pornography to teach our young people? Really? Is that where we are today? She's against bad values, but what are the true values? Who determines what's right and wrong? Well, we need the Bible like we've never needed it before. To be a lamp unto our feet, as it says in the Psalms, to show us the way, to light up our path, to define what's right and wrong. There was an article at Wired magazine back in September. This journalist interviewing this author. The journalist, she has 2 boys, I think it is. She's raising them in a porn culture, as she writes in her article. And then she's interviewing this woman who's writing a book about boys and about sex and love and, yes, pornography. And so anyway, this woman is basically saying, look, anyone and everyone's watching it. We might as well accept that all boys are watching it. All of our teenage boys are watching it. And she's quoted in the Wired piece as saying, porn is really only the extreme end of an issue. We know these things are fake. That's not the way the two people really interact. Kids have to be able to contextualize, to deconstruct it, just like they need to with other forms of media. Because yes, everyone is upset about porn, but the messages they get from garden variety media are just as influential, maybe more so. So look, there's some bad messages there, but the thing is, as educators, as parents, we've got to get in there and teach them and show them. Show them what parts of pornography are fake or not right. Show them how to consume it safely. Show them how to be responsible. This is what passes for education today. That's right. This is what passes for education. People are really serious about this. I quoted on my radio program another piece in The Atlantic in December. The journalist title of that piece, The Environmental Cost of Internet Porn. Now he's sounding the alarm because, well, there's an environmental cost because so many people are streaming these videos. It's taking its toll on the environment. What can we do? Finally, you see, climate change is moving some, in the case of that Atlantic piece, to sound the alarm. But think of that. I mean, here's this filth that millions upon millions of people are consuming. Filth that degrades and objectifies women. Filth that weakens the will, the strength, the discipline of men, that robs them of true masculinity. Here is all of this filth online, on television, everywhere, destroying marriages, destroying families, and giving our young people, our children, your children, this warped and twisted view of the God-ordained purposes for marriage and family, for sex in marriage. It's all laid out there in the Holy Bible. God gives us instructions, but we just want to rebel against them and go our own way. Here people are more concerned, in the case at least of this one article, more concerned about, pornography's carbon footprint than how pornography is destroying our families. So sad. We have a lot of literature that we'd like for you to order today. This one here, The Missing Dimension in Sex, we've offered a few times on television, together with this one, which I don't know if we've offered, Ezekiel, the end-time prophet. We'll talk more about some of the prophecies in Ezekiel's book coming up in the next segment. But make sure that you call our operators and request both of these free books today, and also subscribe to our monthly magazine, the Philadelphia Trumpet. We'll be right back.
But if you look at educators and scientists and psychologists today, they talk about moral standards and all of that, but they believe in evolution. They do not know the origin and purposes of sex. They don't know the origin of marriage. They do not know. Well, it's very clear if you believe the Bible. But if you reject the Bible, well, you're just relying on human reasoning. And that's going to bring you disaster. That's good. That's what's bringing this world disaster. And our number one problem today is that of human survival, because we're relying on the human mind and not God's thinking.
That clip there was from my father's television program from December 2017. The title, God's Purposes of Sex. He took some of that information and converted it into an article that's titled, The Beautiful Truth That Would Solve the Sex Scandals. And that's in this particular issue of the Trumpet magazine. The beautiful truth. Here we hear so much about all of these sex scandals, the Me Too movement, abusing women, sexism. We hear so much about that, and people get up on their self-righteous pedestal and they will preach away. And meanwhile, we've got all of this pornography. It's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And who says anything about it? If they say anything, as I said in the first segment, it's that, well, we've got to join along with our children and consume it ourselves and help them navigate their way through it. It's upside down, just like I read from Isaiah 5. God does give us instruction. He does, but like Mr. Armstrong says in The Missing Dimension in Sex, that we've had all of this truth and this divine purpose for marriage and family and sex, and yet we just continue on in ignorance, going on our own ways. Look at what it says in Isaiah 1. I mentioned that prophecy in Ezekiel that I want to get to. I'll have to hurry along here if I'm going to get to it. But Isaiah 1 and verse 5, it says, The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot, even unto the head, there's no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. That's what God says about our nations today, about our people. He talks about a sickness from head to toe. And what do you do when you're sick or you're diseased? You want to get it out of your system. You don't want to just bring more of it in. You don't want to just pour more filth and disease in. You want to remove it from your body. Well, morally speaking, spiritually speaking, that's what we have to do if we're going to be healed, if we're going to be clean, if we're going to be healthy again. Notice this prophecy in Ezekiel 24, first at the end of the chapter, just to kind of give you the context, or rather the theme of this entire chapter. Verse 27, it says, In that day shall your mouth be opened to him which is escaped, and you shall speak, and be no more dumb, and you shall be a sign unto them, and they shall know that I am the Eternal. That's the theme of the chapter. That's the theme, the dominant theme of the whole book. God brings punishment upon our people so that we can come to know Him again. We've drifted so far away from Him. So back up to verse 1. Verses 1 and 2, it says, Again, in the 9th year, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, the word of the Eternal came unto me, saying, Son of man, write you the name of the day, even this same day, the king of Babylon set himself against Jerusalem, this same day. So this very day that God gave Ezekiel revelation, it commemorated the day of the siege of Jerusalem. Yes, Judah went off into captivity. They were just run over by the Babylonians, and before them the Israelites, uprooted out of their land of Samaria and taken off into Assyria. That's what happened anciently. It's the same. It's the same with Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the same with the period before the flood. When sin becomes so rampant and widespread, look at what happens in Bible history. And look at what happens in secular history. As I said at the top of the show, Edward Gibbon pointed it out. That's been consistent. The rise and then the fall of these great empires. What's the cause? Why does it happen over and over again? Well, carrying on as Ezekiel here, It says, and utter a parable. So here's the vision, this parable. Utter a parable unto the rebellious house, and say unto them, Thus says the eternal God, set on a pot, set it on, and also pour water into it, gather the pieces thereof into it, even every good piece, the thigh and the shoulder, fill it with choice bones, take the choice of the flock, and burn also the bones under it, and make it boil well, it says, and let them seethe the bones of it therein. Wherefore, thus says the eternal God, Woe to the bloody city, to the pot whose scum is therein, and whose scum is not gone out of it. Bring it out piece by piece. Let no lot fall upon it. What could this be talking about? Well, my father gets into it at length. I'm not going to have time to go through all of it, but it's right here in this booklet. Ezekiel, the end-time prophet, God is talking about all of this sin. All of this sin. He says, look, here's the parable. Load this pot full of flesh and the strongest of bones, and burn all of it. Burn all of it. It says in verse 7, For her blood is in the midst of her, and she set it upon the top of a rock. She poured it not upon the ground to cover it with dust. I mean, basically, we've set our sins up on the top of a rock, up on the top of a mountain. We declare it in front of the whole world. There's a verse in Isaiah 3, it's verse 9, that talks about the sin of our countenance, or the show of our countenance. It reveals us. It says that we declare our sins as Sodom. We're so proud of these things. We're so proud that we're this open-minded, that we just accept any and every kind of behavior, that now we see it as, we didn't see it this way a generation ago or 2 generations ago, but now we see it as morally acceptable. Oh yes, we're that sophisticated, we're that modern, we're that enlightened. And meanwhile, look at all the problems that are just coming down upon us. One after another, God says in verse 8, that it might cause fury to come up to take vengeance. I have set her blood upon the top of a rock, that it should not be covered. Basically, God's saying, look, if we're going to go about declaring our sins before all nations, before the whole world, then the punishment that's coming upon our nations, God's going to declare that as well. God's going to hold that up for everyone to see. Well, in the parable, I don't have time to get through all of it, but it goes on and says, look, burn all of the bones and the flesh, and then take the actual pot and burn the pot and the scum, burn the corrosion, burn the rust, all of it. Just let it sit there and melt on that bed of coals. That's what God wants to do, to purge us of these kinds of sins so that we can get back to obeying His laws. Yes, it really is about education. Not the kind of education I talked about in the first segment. There is instruction. God inspired instruction in books like this. We use this in our classes at Armstrong College. This is a textbook. And it's not just about the physical act of sex. It's about God's purpose for man. And why sex, and why marriage, and why family. We've resisted and rebelled against that. And so we see these many problems that we have, but there's so much beauty in what God's created, including human beings, including male and female, as it says in Genesis 1:27. So much beauty if we just dig into these laws and obey them. Let me just play you one final clip here in conclusion from my father's program, that same program from December 2017.
Sex was created to bring a husband and wife together in love. That's the purpose of it. The main purpose in marriage is to have sex and bring those two people together so they have this wonderful relationship, and sex keeps it interesting, and they learn to love each other more and more and more and have children and are just thrilled to have children and have them, if they're directed God's way and taught God's way. It's one of the most miraculous and fantastic blessings on this earth. But that's not the way it is in most families. And it should be. It should be.
That again is my father's program, December 2017. And what a blessing it is to have the laws of God, to have the understanding about God's purpose. Make sure that you request our free booklets today, The Missing Dimension in Sex, Ezekiel, the End-Time Prophet, and then subscribe to our Trumpet magazine. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.